Hi guys. When we left off in school, we were talking about probability distribution. So I figured we'd start off again with some simple rules and how to do probability distribution. If you can follow along with me, that would be great. Take some notes so that when you have to do your independent practice, you won't have any trouble. So for probability distribution, the sum of all the probabilities must equal 1. So when you add up all of the probabilities, if it does not equal 1, it is not a probability distribution. The probability of each individual event, so each specific probability, has to be between 0 and 1, including the 0 and the 1. So it cannot be less than 0 or more than 1. Okay, less than 0, they're talking about negative numbers. Okay, and then more than 1 is anything like 1.5, 1.7, and so on. Okay, so if they're telling you to determine if the probability distribution is valid, valid just means, is it true? Okay, is it going to be correct? So true or correct. And then it says to explain why or why not. So the first thing you want to do is check to see that the sum of all the probabilities is 1. So you can go ahead and add all of the probabilities on the bottom in your calculator. If you add all of them together, it does equal 1. So the first rule checks out. You do have to check because both of these have to work. Okay, they both have to work. So if I check out the second rule, the probability of each individual event cannot be less than 0 or more than 1. Well, I know I don't have any negative probabilities, so that is good. And none of these values here, none of these probabilities are greater than 1. So the second one checks out. Therefore, this probability distribution is valid. And I would say valid because, since we wanted to explain our work, it's valid because the sum of the probabilities is 1, and there were no negative probabilities, and all probabilities were between 0 and 1. Okay, and that kind of just talks about the negatives and nothing over the 1, okay, including the 0 and 1. Okay, if we look at our second probability distribution, so number 2's example, you're going to notice, in my opinion, it comes like straight to me that there's a negative value here. That automatically makes this probability distribution not valid. So you don't really have to check to see that all of these added up equals 1 because there's already a negative there. So it automatically makes it not valid. Okay, if you were to have added the probabilities first, it would equal 1. But then you still have to check the second rule to make sure that they are between 0 and 1, which is not the case, not valid. You cannot have a negative probability. Okay, so that's determining whether a probability distribution is valid. But when it comes to finding a missing probability in the chart, we did talk a little bit in class about how to do that. So I'm going to try to give you a really simple thing to remember here. It's 1 minus the sum of numbers given. And when I talk about the numbers, I mean the probabilities that are given. Okay, so they're asking me to solve for the probability that's missing in each one of these, in example 4 and 5. It looks like in 4, we're missing what goes underneath the 10. So I'm going to add up because it's the sum of all the numbers given, so sum of all these probabilities. So I'm going to add these 3 up in my calculator. And when you add all 3 of those up, you get 0.49. And since all of the probabilities always have to add up to 1, if we subtract from 1, we get what the missing value is. So in this case, we do 1 minus 0.49, and it comes to 0.51. So my x value is 0.51. That's my missing probability. Okay, and the same goes for fractions. You have in your calculator the alpha y equals function that does the fractions for you. So again, you could use the method we had talked about. When there is a common denominator, you can just add the tops. But I think a lot of you have some difficulty with that, so I would just suggest putting them in the calculator and adding up all the values that are given, including the 0. Okay, so if you were to add it up, and again, you could use, and just in case you don't remember, you could hit alpha y equals enter, and you could enter everything as a fraction. Okay, so if I did all of these fractions added together, I will get 5, so remember we're adding. So we would get 5 over 9. Okay, and then again, we're going to use our 1 minus 5 over 9. So be really careful how you put that into the calculator. I'll demonstrate here. Okay, common mistake, students always like to put the 5 over 9 first. It's 1 minus alpha y equals, if you like to do the fraction button, 5 over 9, and you hit enter, you get 4 over 9. Okay, so the missing probability that we had to find was 4 over 9, and that would go over here. Okay, so that's just like my quick little recap of what we were doing in class. I know that there were quite a few students that were out, so I figured we'd start here. Your independent practice is on the back. There are 3 questions. So you guys are going to take a look at that. Oh, this numbering is incorrect, but I promise you have the right one. So I would like for you guys to work on 1, 2, and 3, and then if you can get me that, that would be great. All right, guys, talk to you soon. And if you have any trouble with this, feel free to chat with me on Canvas. Bye.